So here's a plant that can serve well both the symptoms of the coughing as an antispasmodic in the way that it can just relax the lung tissue.
Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. First up is the Herbs with Rosalee Student Spotlight. Each week we take a moment to celebrate one of our amazing students and their inspiring contributions to our herbal community. This week's spotlight shines on an outstanding herbal student, Carol Nash from Arizona. In 2024 alone, Carol immersed herself in 3 different courses with us here at Herbs with Rosalee, including Rooted Medicine Circle, Herbal Energetics, and Cooling Inflammation. Even with overlapping course schedules, Carol showed up with enthusiasm, attending live events, engaging deeply with the material, and asking thoughtful questions. Through her dedication, she's gained a new sense of confidence in her skills and now regularly makes remedies for her loved ones. Or as she shared, I do not go a day now that I'm not making an herbal remedy for my family. It's such a joy to have Carol in class. Her growth and commitment are truly inspiring. To honor her contributions, Mountain Rose Herbs is sending Carol a $50 gift certificate to stock up on their incredible selection of sustainably sourced herbal supplies. Mountain Rose Herbs is my go-to for high-quality organic spices, herbal remedies, and even hard-to-find botanicals. They ship all over the U.S. and have a massive selection of products to fuel your herbal adventures. Thank you to Mountain Rose Herbs for supporting our amazing students. If you'd like to explore Mountain Rose Herbs' offering and support this show, you can find the special link in the show notes. Well, I just wrapped up this interview with joAnna, and I swear I'm glowing just from being in her presence. This was my first time meeting her, and I just couldn't have been happier that I got the chance, and now I'm thrilled to share our conversation with you. One of the things that stood out for me was joAnna's deep appreciation for lobelia. She has so much respect for this little plant that has this big reputation, and she just shared an incredible mix of history, personal stories, and practical wisdom. So whether lobelia is an old friend or a complete mystery to you, I think you'll love this interview as much as I did. For those of you who don't know her, joAnna's herbal journey began in the natural foods industry in 1979. She later served as a clinician in private practice for 13 years. She was and remains a voracious reader of all things botanical. In 1997, joAnna wrote 5 texts and started teaching coursework at Sonoran University, where she began what is now likely the largest plant medicine garden in the Southwest. joAnna launched her own herb school for personal interest and professional training and has trained a host of herbalism educators. She is a passionate educator, plant hunter, gardener, and conservationist herbalist. joAnna has a calling to remain personally experiential with her relationship to the plants and to practice the preservation of herbal traditions. joAnna, thank you so much for being here. I am really excited to chat with you.
Thank you, Rosalee. It's a pleasure.
Well,
My pleasure.
That's my pleasure as well. We were just chatting a bit about, I feel like we just are coming from entirely different ecosystems. I'm in the snowy mountains of Washington State, close to Canada. You're in the Sonoran Desert. And I'm excited to hear about how that has shaped, your herbal path and your connection to the plants as well. And that's where we could start really, is just how did you find yourself on this plant path?
Yeah. So it began as a child. And I think my story is very similar to what happens for herbalists is that I, unlike those in my household or on my street, had this uncanny attraction to all the plants.
Mhm.
And no one else even noticed, the beautiful flowers on the horse chestnut or the dandelions, in the lawn, or just the beautiful. I was raised in New England in the woods, and so I had lots of beautiful um, perennials and annuals that I just couldn't stop. I love the sugar maple that was in my father's backyard, and the weeping willow. I loved pulling on its strong and flexible limbs, and so it began as a child. But in my early 20s, I moved to the Sonoran Desert. So I have been here for many
Mm.
decades now. And it's often charming, maybe is a word to say. People say, go ask joAnna Sanchez about this plant or that plant. She's the desert expert. And I think, isn't that funny? A young gal from New England, but I've been here so long that this is the materia medica that I know, intimately, walking around in the deserts, and what's food and what's medicine and what's toxic. There are a few of those in the desert for sure, like every habitat. So, and I think, I heard Seja Popham say the other day on a talk that he was beckoned. I think that's just perfect. We're called, plant folk. And so I was as a child, and I just never, it was discouraged sometimes, it was encouraged other times, but I just never lost the interest or the attraction, or, I just can't imagine a world without plants.
Hmm. That's
So,
beautiful. And
yeah.
so how did that unfold? Like, you leave home, you go to the
Yeah,
Sonoran Desert.
yeah.
How did you start working with plants?
Well, my first educational training was in social work, but I kept taking plant science courses. And so I was able to hang out with the botanists at the universities. And my second degree was in forestry and wildlife management in New England. So I started in an educational path in terms of the, academics of the study of the plants. And when I moved to Arizona, I fortunately started in the natural food industry and worked as a retailer and a broker for a long time, and was able to meet a myriad of people who are influential in, the earlier generation of herbalists, if you will. And so that was a wonderful thing to be working side by side from chemists and naturopathic doctors and herbalists. That it afforded me the opportunity to study with them, but also I got all kinds of invitations, locally from our great Western master, Michael Moore, invited me to join him, on his teachings. And so I got to follow him around in the Southwest for a few years. And the Tierras, Leslie and Michael, invited me to workshops and things like that because of my presence in the natural food industry as a broker and a retailer and like that. So I spent a good, more than a dozen years doing that kind of work. And then I slowly evolved my personal study. I think a lot of my generation of herbalists are mostly self-taught, even though I've been around many of and befriended some, and professional associations with many of the wonderful people who really bring the American herbal renaissance to the fore. So I had the opportunity to be in their company and to learn with them. From them and with them. And so that led me to doing, by request, consultations. And so, I did that I had a private practice, seeing clients for about 13 or 14 years. And somewhere near the end of that, I realized that it would be important to get more than one person at a time, because as herbalists, we're educators and not, I'm not a licensed practitioner. And so I couldn't, practice medicine, but I was very supportive to my community in their health goals with botanicals primarily, but also because I had worked in the natural food industry. I knew dietary supplements as the broad category that the herbs are legislated under. And so clinical work brought me to educational work, where I could bring a larger audience to the same kinds of topics. And some of those brokerage companies, large herb companies would fly me around to do large audiences and, the topics, colds and flus and immune system and female care and, all the things that we learn in those large understandings of the groupings of the materia medica. And that led to me doing at first private educational work for 3 or 4 years, and then partnering up with a local private community college where I started my herb school that I ran for 27 years, and also began writing courses at which is what is now the Sonoran University, was then the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. So they invited me to write a few courses, but there were and teach them. Uh, no medicine plants on that campus when I arrived 28 years ago. So the first thing I did was, politely escort the maintenance man to dig up some plots for me and not put in, just ornamentals. And now it's the largest medicine garden in, I think, the Southwest, but certainly in
Oh, wow.
Arizona. Over almost 4,000 square feet of medicine plants that are used in the labs there for the education at the university for the naturopathic candidates, but also for the school that I just bequeathed forward. Um, uh, it was Botanica Herb School, and now it's Panacea Herb School. And so those students intern in that cultivation space and learn, international herbs that we didn't think we could grow in the desert, but it's remarkable. Some of the water loving herbs like gotu-kola and bacopa thrive in our garden
Oh,
there.
wow.
So the students are able to know hands on with the living plants some of the medicines that we use in many different traditions, locally and internationally. So it's a wonderful learning place. And so, I had the good fortune of running an herb school and having hundreds, thousands, I don't know, of students come through, old-fashioned hands-on training. The students learned for about 16 months. So, it was very good overview of herbalism with a beautiful classroom and apothecary and kitchen preparation place and a wonderful library that I was able to grow over the years. And so mostly I have been an educator.
Mhm. I love that story,
Mhm.
joAnna, and I love this, just, presencing what it has been like for you to build something for 27 years, and this idea of, like, you getting the maintenance person to dig up some plots of land for you, and, I mean, at that point so I have to ask, did you get permission, or was that just on the
I
side?
didn't. It's funny, I didn't get but I never often didn't think of that, I don't know why. I wasn't I didn't. I just said, "I need that spot. Don't put whatever you're putting there that's gonna be for me." And he was like, but no, I never really asked permission, but the school was all in favor because, it
Yeah,
was a naturopathic medical school and one of
right.
their modalities is botanical medicine. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so then eventually I got a staff and, you
Mm,
know, uh, now, and I'm still with the university some. And so I have a staff, a full staff of gardeners, and
mhm.
it's, integrated part of the training there as well as the science, the lab. It's a research university as well. So
Oh,
it's
cool.
funny you asked that, but no, I guess I didn't get
It's
permission.
very rebel herbalist of you, like, I kinda when you as soon as you said it, I was like, "I bet she didn't ask."
I did not, because the hierarchy of asking, it would have taken
Right,
forever,
right,
and I
yeah, no.
needed.
The plants probably beckoned you to get
That's
those
right.
plots.
Yes, they requested to be visitors, so
Yeah, and yeah, and I
I
love this idea of, like, young joAnna being like, "How about we just dig up this, on the sly or whatever," and then that becomes a 4,000 square foot garden that's, one of the biggest in the Southwest, and I mean, that's
yeah,
just, like, I think it's always great for everybody to hear that, like, these ideas start small,
yes,
and they grow with time, and, like, to not be intimidated by the end product that we see, but to
no,
just get started,
yeah,
and
well,
illegally dig up land to plant plants. I think that's the takeaway.
that's right, yeah, because in both instances, for my herb school, I with the gal that I partnered with, she said, let's do 100 hours. I said, no, let's do 30 and see if there's an interest. And now
Mm,
it's 750 clock hours,
yeah.
and I didn't have that big vision of either of those things, but
Mhm.
starting with nothing and then bringing it, it's all about the calling, you
Mhm.
know, and the plants and being able to do the work. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Well,
beautiful.
how fortunate I am, that I
Mhm.
was able to create those, 2 things and,
Yeah.
be an avenue for learning.
And then to have, thousands of students that have been through, your courses and spent your time with you, I know it's very influential. Beth, who I had Ebbing, who I'd interviewed a couple months ago, I mean, you were her big start, and
Mm,
and it still is something I can see that just deeply influences her heart to this day.
yeah,
So,
and they had a little I sold and passed my school forward, just recently, and,
mm,
they had a little gathering on my behalf. It was so wonderful to see
mm,
students, some of them from the very first program, and
wow.
several of them in individual private conversations, they said, it has had a rippling effect, Like one woman owned a little, herbal manufacturing facility and employed 6 herbalists, So there were
Mhm,
7 people who had been through the curriculum and the program and learned about herbs, and now they're all carrying it forward, so it's just a wonderful thing.
that
Yeah,
is really wonderful.
yeah.
Well, now I would love to hear about lobelia. I'm so thrilled that you chose lobelia as your plant. This is such an amazing plant, somewhat misaligned plant historically. Yeah, so I'm just really excited to hear what you have to share about lobelia.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're right. That's a very good way to say that. It has been misaligned historically. So I, this lobelia is in the Campanulaceae family. And, I only know 2 plants that I have a familiarity with that family. And the harebells, which is just an ornamental, and Cotinopsis, which is a wonderful herb that we've learned from the Chinese tradition. So, anyway, it's a kind of a not obscure, but an unusual family for the plant medicines, and the official species is the inflata, which is what is, I is in the eastern part of the United States and North America. And there's also a species here in, the Southwest, called cardinalis. So we have the blue-flowered, which is a little bit more diminutive plant, and the red flower, that's the real tall one, but they are, for the most part, interchangeable. The cardinalis is, the red flowered is, not as strong. So the official is what's used. And so I wanted to speak about lobelia because I wanted to give testimony. I wanted to be sure that I was speaking about a plant that my cells, my body knew intimately so that I could express my understanding of the plant. So um, this is a plant that, when your helper Emily was asking me about, give some ideas about the taste. I remember when I was an early clinician, with children, I would tell them this is not going to taste good until I learned to add corrigents and make them taste sweet and stuff like that. But in the early parts, but it's going to make you feel better, and so take your medicine when your mama gives it to you. So it's kind of like that with lobelia, this acrid, very not pleasant flavor. And then many folks I find, even though the fire cider is, a phenomenon, lots of folks don't like vinegar either. And the best way to deliver the lobelia, fresh plant, aerial parts of the plant, um, both the historical references from even before the eclectics, the Thomsonians, for instance, Samuel Thomas, who was a farmer, self-taught, kind of rustic um, person who brought. We often trace our lineage to Samuel Thompson as herbalists. He learned from the indigenous folks in his area. He was from New Hampshire, so the Penobscots were the Indians that taught him, and the references always list this widow Benton. So I hired librarian at the Lloyd Library to dig through the literature to see if they could find Widow Benton and or more about her. But all we have is those few words that the Widow
Mm.
Benton taught Samuel Thompson. So we have this 200 years of use of lobelia, and he got into trouble. I mean, he got arrested for using lobelia. And so, on one hand, I don't want to scare, but this is a plant to respect as a medicinal agent, and the taste of it tells us that.
Mhm.
But it is powerful and effective. So powerful in that we should use it in low doses. Effective in that it works almost immediately. It has an affinity. Well, I get one of the most important actions, if you will, of this herb is that it is antispasmodic. So powerful for all kinds of spasms, but it has an affinity to the respiratory system and the nervous system. So the respiratory system, I feel this is has contemporary importance because we have lots of long-term coughs and respiratory things, residual from the COVID, for instance. Here where I live, our respiratory winter viruses often affect the upper respiratory system. So here's a plant that can serve well both the symptoms of the coughing as an antispasmodic in the way that it can just relax the lung tissue. But also it is a plant that is antispasmodic, so relaxing tissue in the nervous system. And so that's where my personal story overlaps with lobelia, and it has been an ally and a friend to me for more than 2 decades at this point, or almost 2 decades at this point, as for the artifacts, the residual, um, concerns, health concerns, from having had a very severe condition with Lyme disease.
Mm.
And so the artifacts for me were Tourette's and un, twitches and uh, involuntary nervous system responses. And so um, this is, I have had the fortunate uh, circumstance of being able to receive the gift of lobelia in the immediacy of the ability for it to calm the musculature. So, and that would be the physical, ex, how those symptoms come about, but also the way it relates to the nervous system. So this is a plant that we use in very small doses. You can do a tincture. Fresh is always best with lobelia. Tinctures um, are more like, even though you're using fresh, the ratio of the plants to the solvent here is broader than what we would normally expect for a fresh plant because the fresh plants bring so much water. We usually add more alcohol, but in this case, we'd make it weaker because the plant is so strong. And so a weaker, almost tincture-like presentation, hydroalcohol of the lobelia, or the acetum or the acetract using the apple cider vinegar. And I think that's the recipe that you'll share. I find that vinegar is just as quick, but it is much less likely to induce what would be the contraindication. And this is part of why lobelia got maligned, is that it is an emetic. And an emetic is not often needed, but if it was, then yay, that you can get the poison out of your system by vomiting. And so, unlike some of the other potential toxic herbs, we call this a low dose or a toxic herb, like Rauwolfia or lily of the valley or datura. Those herbs are not going to warn you, with the powerful potential poison that they can be if they're misunderstood. But lobelia, the toxicity is, you're going to vomit before you get the toxicity in your bloodstream. So, yay, it's almost like a quality of that
Mhm.
gift from that plant. So, we have this wonderful ability to calm all kinds of paroxysms, particularly that of asthma. I wish I had known about this plant as a young child because I had asthma pretty severe from when I was about 3 to 17 years old. And just when I read about some of the old literature from the Thomsonians, um, Samuel Thompson himself and Dr. Coffin, his protege, and some of those folks, they'll talk about clients, patients of theirs who had to sit up all night with asthma. Well, that was exactly how it was for me as a child. And so those folks who unfortunately would be able to relate to that, that's exactly the kind of asthma, bronchial constriction and pressure on the chest that lobelia supports. And it just takes a little bit, a half a mil. Sometimes that's all is needed is one dose. And I've read lots of doctors' accounts, even when the eclectics adopted the use of lobelia, how even in pregnancy, a woman, for instance, one of the cases I read, suffering from severe coughing in her last trimester of pregnancy, and just one dose of the half a mil of the lobelia extract. They used to use the eclectics used it with strawberries, and they made it like kind of sweet. And then they used half seed and half living live aerial portions, and then mix it all together and dispensed it that way. And just one dose of that helped a woman. And many accounts I've heard of, if you read the works of Dr. John Christopher, who in the 40s, 50s, and 60s here really kept herbalism alive as a kind of a foot soldier troubadour for herbalism. He was in the lineage of the Thomsonians, but he spoke of lobelia as having a brain, that it can think, that it knows where to go. And oftentimes people, when I've used it with others, will say, oh, I can feel it in my fingers. I can feel it in my toes. Like right away, it gets into the bloodstream, and it's diffusive. So it goes from the center all the way to the periphery. And folks can tell. They know that that herb is in their bloodstream when it is. And Dr. Christopher said that it addresses the causes. And I believe that. And so many people with asthma no longer had asthma once they found lobelia, historically in the records. And I've observed that in my clinical work, is that it addresses the reason. And not everyone would have the same reason for having a respiratory infirmity, but lobelia can find that. And so to say that about a plant really sounds like, oh, that's an herbalist talking, how we understand the spirituality and the energetic qualities. And the nice thing about, in terms of energetics about lobelia, is that it's neutral. So it's not going to overheat or cold, constrict with coldness for the individual user. It's just very neutral. So I don't know, I guess I've rambled on for a while
Well,
there,
that was
but
great.
yeah, so antispasmodic activity of the lobelia is very important, but also in that work, especially with respiratory illnesses, is that it is a wonderful emetic, expectorant, excuse me. And again, I've seen huge amounts of mucus come from people's lungs when nothing else did it, all the other expectorants. Or lobelia works well in combination. And so added to a respiratory formula that it wasn't used before, all of a sudden you have this thinning of the mucus and this capacity for the body to shed away what's been compacted and causing constriction in the lungs and in the respiratory system. So, and then I think a noteworthy utilization of lobelia is for tobacco withdrawal. So the alkaloids, there are several of them, but the most noteworthy one is the lobeline, and that's in both the cardinalis and in the inflata. Has a wonderful way of mimicking and stimulating the vagus nerve in the way that nicotine does. So people are able to get relief from the cravings of nicotine because it's so powerfully addictive, as well as support the withdrawal by using small amounts, in this case, very small amounts, because it'll trigger the nicotine overdose kind of side effects, which are nausea and dizziness. And so you have to be very careful with lobelia for nicotine withdrawal. Not, and you don't have to in the same way with the respiratory and expectorant applications of it. So, yeah.
I love that you mentioned how quickly it acts because for people who might not be as familiar with herbalism, I feel like that's a common complaint just out of unknowing. They'll say like, "Oh, herbs take too long to work."
Oh,
Something
well,
like that. And I think lobelia, as you said, is a great example of an herb that doesn't take too long to work at all. I mean, the effects
yeah,
are immediate. Um,
right.
and
Well,
it is such
sometimes
a
we,
great one for students to study too, because of that acrid taste. And also
mhm,
when we're tasting herbs to feel them in our bodies, like for me, when I taste something like ashwagandha, I'm not like, wow, like
yeah,
that all of a sudden created this like response in me. But lobelia
no,
is one that does create an immediate
yeah,
response. You say, oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, right. It's talking to us.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so sometimes we do have to wait for our healing, especially if it took a long time to get us to it.
Hmm.
But in the case of lobelia, it can be very rapid and life-changing. But also, as I said, it has been my ally for a very long time, and I've had to. It accompanies me on my, everywhere at home and in my travels, um, and yet I can have so, the backstop to, yes, this is a low dose botanical and it's very strong, but I can use large doses of it safely, and I have been using it for a very long time to uh, nourish and balance my nervous system's response left over from the spirochete that made me very ill.
Hmm.
So how fortunate that it can get straight to my nervous system and shut off a you know screaming attack of Tourette's.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, but
Hmm.
fortunately, that I have this herb to work with and for me.
Yeah,
So.
thank you. And it's a gift to all of us for you to share that. I've never heard lobelia worked with in that way. So thank you so much for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I'm curious with its nervous system response. Have you worked with it for something like anxiety and calming the nervous system in that way?
It may be similar to like a rescue remedy, the flower
Hmm.
essence medicines, uh, short term. But if it's used for that, what often happens is you have to do repeated doses. It's
Hmm.
like having a just a little bit of kindling on a fire and then it goes out and you got to keep
Hmm.
stoking it to make fire so that
Hmm.
there's enough energy in the body, circulatory energy. So it could be used in an emergency for that, but it wouldn't address, yeah, because that's not its affinity. So it's not going to address the underlying causes of
Right.
where that might stem from. But in an emergency, I would say yes, it could be helpful to someone to just calm them right down, and
Hmm.
then maybe they can move forward on their own or seek out some other remedies or support.
That's beautifully
Yeah.
said. Just kind of in the both the gifts and the boundaries there in terms of what we can expect.
Yeah, because every plant has its talent, and also places where it just doesn't have an affinity to.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think of lobelia for the respiratory system. That's I think it really shines there, as you've beautifully stated as well. And I'm curious. I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
One is about the emetic quality of it.
Hmm.
I've taken lobelia quite a bit, but always in smaller amounts,
Hmm.
drops at a time, for
Yeah.
example. And I've never had an emetic effect from it. And I've heard that possibly the emetic effect is more possible, of course, with larger dosages, but even I've heard maybe with a tea, it might be more susceptible. And then I've heard, that this dose can be quite large. So I'm just curious, like, have you seen that effect? Do
Right.
you
Well,
maybe some people are more susceptible than others too, perhaps?
yeah, so I find that the tincture is strongest.
Mm,
The acetic acetract is will diminish that emetic nausea, and the tea is really dependent on the user.
Mm,
So I've had no effects sufficient what we would be looking for, and too much,
mm.
all from tea. So I think that that has to do with the individual chemistries of people
Interesting.
meeting up with the chemistry of the lobelia. So I can't speak to it across the board.
Okay. Well, that's
Yeah,
still interesting to hear.
yeah,
And let's talk about the acetum. So that's the recipe you've shared with us. Thank you so much for sharing that recipe. And for listeners, you can go to herbswithrosaliePodcast.com or look at the show notes to download your beautifully illustrated recipe. And it's rare that an herb is specifically recommended as an acetum, but lobelia is one of the plants that is traditionally recommended in this way. And I was just
yeah,
wondering if you could speak to that. You have already a little bit, but I just wanted
yeah.
to maybe look at it a
Yeah,
little bit
so,
closer.
I mean, I find, we stand on the shoulders of some greats, and so we're so fortunate that if we look back in time, we can continue to learn from those folks who came before us, and when we look to the literature where, Samuel Thompson would have claimed that he introduced lobelia to us, even though he was taught by, some indigenous folks and uh, practitioners, if you will, village practitioners where he was raised. But so we have 200 years of observation, and that's how they did it then as well. So we've learned from our tradition how to dispense, and it just works so well that way with
Mm-hmm.
the vinegar that I follow suit, So, and
Hmm.
certainly contemporary folks like a place where I often will order it because I don't have a GMP facility here locally in Sedona, Arizona. They also make an AC tract of it. So, a fine pharmacist, herbalist who's preparing the tinctures according to some old traditions, eclectic literature, and contemporary pharmacy are doing it that way. So, yeah, there's a lot of confirmation for its
Hmm.
use as acetic acid. I don't know if that's adding any more knowing to you, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to know that, and that again, some herbs are not like maybe not recommended as a vinegar, but we have this vinegar extract, but lobelia
Yeah, because
definitely is. And
vinegar is a poor solvent in some circumstances for the constituents, but for these alkaloids, there's a volatile oil in the seeds, which is very important to the expectorant quality and for this withdrawal from nicotine for it to have an effect on the brain. Um, yeah,
well, as you say, the seeds. Every
the
time someone
seeds.
says lobelia seeds, I think of the first time I tasted lobelia seeds. I will never forget that moment. I had grown the plant myself. I got seeds from Strictly Medicinals and grew it because I wanted,
Oh, nice.
I'd been reading about it and I wanted to experience it. And it's not something you find everywhere. So grew it
Yes. And
myself and then was just so excited when the seeds got there. And I think I just had that like young herbal excitement where I was just ready to do anything without questioning. I think I'm still a little bit like that, but at the time, I just didn't think about it. I was like, "Okay, I got the lobelia seeds," and popped it
yeah.
into my mouth, and yeah, you never forget that first taste. I don't think it's so intense, and just the acridity. I
Right.
mean, I'll just never, that is like a great way to introduce yourself to acridity. So I
That's
highly
right.
recommend that folks taste lobelia, get a sense for it, and again, it's a fun plant in that you will immediately feel the effects of it as well. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of
It's
learning in that.
it's also a beautiful plant,
Mhm.
Yeah, those little, the corolla with the beautiful, it's two-lipped, and it's got beautiful 3 lobes hanging, and it's pretty, pretty, the blue and the red that we
Yeah.
have here,
Yeah, the red is
so
so striking as well. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
striking,
Mhm.
striking, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, it's not, some herbs, well, I do have to say, I was gonna say some herbs are like cure-alls, but the Hispanic folks who use the cardinalis here, they call it curado todo, which really is like saying it cures everything. It
Mhm.
cures everything that it can cure, so the things that it's specific for, it is it reaches to the uh, depths of the circulatory system and the organs and the whole organism, meaning the whole body. Um, so yeah, yeah, it's a. I tend to. I mean, it seems a little naive or quaint to say it has a brain, but it's like, wow, it's just so intelligent. I've seen it, people with pains in different places and constrictions in different parts of the body, and that's where the lobelia sends either the herbs that it's in combination with or as a simple. It's not a plant that's often used as a simple directly in clinical work, so my individual experience with it is a little atypical. It's more often put in pairs, and then it acts as a driver, and so it'll help, um, for instance, catnip with and help lobelia catnip pair will help with cerebral spasms, for instance.
Oh,
Or
interesting.
if you were using it for the lymphatic system, it could pair with bayberry, for instance, or pleurisy and lobelia are very
Oh,
good to relax the lungs and like that. It really directs and steers the herbs that it is put with, and it is in the literature with the physiomedicalists, for instance, often was used that way. To steer the action of the other herb to be very specific because of the understanding that lobelia had this wisdom that it could figure out where it was needed in the body.
hmm. Well, do you know when it was used in these duos like this, or when it is today, is it a 50-50 kind of thing, or is it more of like
Um,
a 1 to 3 or something like that?
yeah, you mean herb to herb
Yeah, like they're,
comparison?
if you're using the
Yeah,
two
so
herb
almost
combination.
always it would be lobelia in a very small portion of the formula, maybe up to 20%. Yeah,
Okay.
so 1 to 4, like
Mhm.
that. Whereas it has a big voice or a big energetic, and
Mhm.
it can do its job in small doses. And it
Mm.
teaches us that as a simple, because we don't need much to get the action that we're looking for each dose. Um, and then it teaches us that in formulation as well.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody who had such an affinity for lobelia because it is so specific and it
I know.
is, and it's not a
Yeah,
lemon balm, it's not a chamomile. It's
no.
so
Or
I'm just
ashwagandha,
yeah, yeah.
that's been a really big word for, the last, I don't know, maybe a decade now.
Mhm,
So, or more maybe. But yeah, you're right, it's not, but it has its place in the
mhm,
materia medica, and it's invaluable to know about it if you need it.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad you chose this plant to share with us, joAnna. Is there anything else you'd like to share about lobelia before we move on?
Let's see. I think I mostly covered all of it. I keep thinking of Samuel Thompson. He he was arrested because of this plant. So perhaps that. And Mr. Ezra Lovett passed away. Unfortunately, he had been treated by all the regulars who couldn't, and when he was in, and that weakened him so much because you know. Um, whatever they were using, antimony or mercury or I don't know what, had really weakened this patient to the point where his life force was probably diminutive, and then he got administered lobelia and passed away. But it probably had nothing to do with the lobelia. And sure enough, Mr. Thompson was acquitted
Mm,
of this. Because of lack of evidence and all of that. And but I guess my point is that he brought this poison. I mean, his notoriety was because lobelia was seen as a poison because of this emetic effect, and yet later it was adopted for that effect and put into the pharmacopoeia in shortly after the U.S. pharmacopoeia started in the 1820s. So here we have an herb that had its rightful place all
mm,
along. So
mhm.
yeah, not such a one of notoriety, but useful to us. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
you're welcome.
Well, you just passed along your school that you've been involved with for decades, and
Mhm.
what is on the menu now as you look forward and maybe some plant projects or things you might be working on?
Yeah, I think, I've been called. I never asked. I didn't know to ask for this work. I have been called to it, beckoned by it, and have fortunately answered the call all along. And so, about 2 years ago, I was, strolling along, picking some berries in the woods, and I realized that I needed to be a plant hunter. And so I really, I have had a very social, career, with students and students and students, and it has been, such a rewarding, opportunity. And, um, I have been graced with the ability to be the conduit as a representative for the plants. And now I feel called to more in a solitary pursuit to go. So it's not like I have this grandiosity uh, idea of what's the next step. My next step is to step back. I fortunately, as I've been aging, feel that I can step into nature's pace, which I
Mm,
wasn't able to do when I was growing school and gardens and students and all of that. And now I feel that I am better equipped to be able to listen better and to go back to the herbs that I've had familiarity with or those that I have not yet had the opportunity to meet and
mm,
explore. And so that's a big part of what's next for me. Although, as soon as I sold my school, I've been asked to do. I have like 4 or 5 things right in front of me to do public presentations. So
mm,
I will do that, especially for local communities, plant societies, herb associations, things like that. When asked, I don't think that I'm going to solicit to expand that aspect, but I certainly usually will, agree when requested. So
mm,
some of that just to keep my teaching skills honed, I suppose.
mm,
And but mostly, I just want to really experience as a true herbalist. Um, those things that I didn't have quite enough time while I was encouraging and um, supporting others to get to do that, their experiential relationships. I was guiding those more
mhm,
than I was able to. Of course, I've been gardening all these years, and I love to be in natural habitats and traveling. And not to say I haven't been with the plants. How could I have done this work? But now
mhm.
I really want to dig into that and just have that experience of the quietness and the serene pace of nature.
Mm. That's so beautiful. I'm a little envious. I definitely
Yes,
resonate with that a
yes.
bit, so
Well,
I
someday
I can
it'll come.
appreciate that.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I know. I feel like, oh, what a blessing. I've
Mhm.
arrived to this place.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I
So,
love that you're like, "I have dedicated decades of my life to plants, and now your next step is to go deeper." You're like, "Okay, I've done this for decades, and now I wanna go deeper." That's what I'm hearing.
yes, now I wanna do what I was called to do, but I've often have to shut after 6 volumes of doing researching something, I had to close the books because I
Mhm,
had to go to the classroom or whatever, or being on the trail with, folks learning. We only had a 3-hour class, so that was that. So
mhm.
now I can go at whatever I can stop. I don't have to stop. I can just,
Mhm.
yeah, because yeah, and I think you must know this or have this, and I don't mean to be presumptuous, but to really be attracted to the plants means that we really are. So we want to grow them and harvest them and nurture them and share them, and so yeah, there's so much more to do.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Well,
Yeah,
I'm, so appreciative that you've made the podcast part of your, the ways that you're sharing, still. I really
yeah,
appreciate that, and
yeah.
before
Well,
you go, I have one last question for you. I'm
uh,
excited to hear your answer to this one, joAnna. The question is, how do herbs instill hope in you?
yeah. So I kind of have a two-part answer. So The first part has to do with the people. And, I came from I was at the just a little bit younger than all the masters that we've learned from in the American herbal renaissance. So I come from a different generation of herbalists where we were self-taught, and we looked to some of that old literature and we just did it. We read and we shared and like that. And I've watched how herbalism has grown in America in such wondrous ways, locally, of course, with my school, and then nationally with, teaching at conferences and things like that. And the young people are where the hope is instilled in me because this is my interpretation or my reception of the herbalists today is that the younger generation, not in age necessarily, but in practice here now, are full with sensuality and they are not afraid to have that expression, the energetics and the spirituality, as well as the physical medicine of the plants, all of it to be brought to the table. And without us using our senses, how can we be complete herbalists? And yet, that to me is everywhere in the marketplace on all of the small cottage companies that are, on the websites and in whenever I've seen the young folks express their herbalism, they're it's all about, they're into the smelling and all these beautiful recipes. We didn't know herbal mocktails until recently. That's the young people who are doing these wonderful things because they're full of their senses and the sensuality of how can nature not be full of sensuality.
Mm,
So that gives me great hope. It's being carried on, this work, this herbalism, this plant healing um, is carrying on and unfolding in such beautiful ways. And so we all know that these are hard times, harder times, perhaps than decades and generations before us on a lot of levels, uh, particularly as it relates to living on the earth. And I have hope that I believe that the plants are our ancestors and they have wisdoms that we don't know enough to even tap into. I feel that the hope is in the plant communities, that this kingdom that we get to live with is enough. That I don't have to be afraid of being alive right now. That
mm,
the plants are powerful enough. And so the hope that I get from being with the plants, the trees, the big trees, and also, all the other diminutive annuals that come to us, and the young people with this strong sense of feeling this work, I feel like, yes, okay, there is hope. This
mm,
in the Spanish, it's esperanza. There is hope. Yes.
mm. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I really resonate with that too. I'm
Mhm.
I'm a walker and I spend a couple hours a day walking um
Yay.
and I especially, when things are like feel too much and too overwhelming and too
Mhm.
dark,
Mhm.
it's the trees these days because that's what I have right now in this snowy
Yeah.
world. But it's the
Yes.
trees who I can literally lean on them
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
feel, like some of that weight taken off and just seeing the beauty there. And so
Yeah.
just the way you said that was just really beautiful. And I think that's one of the great gifts of being an herbalist is that we can turn to the plant simply for hope, and
Yes.
simply to kind of take some of this this overwhelming sense of being a being on this planet in this day and age, and
Yeah.
yeah,
We can
let go
trust
of
in
that.
the power of
Yeah.
nature. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, joAnna, for sharing that. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here on the podcast. It's been utterly delightful to get to know you, and I'm just so
Thank
appreciative.
Same here, Rosalie. Thank you for including me. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Don't forget to head over to the show notes at herbswithrosaliepodcast.com to download your beautifully illustrated recipe card. There, you'll also be able to sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is the best way to stay in touch with me. And now that joAnna is taking more time for herself, you can reach her in the hills of the Sonoran Desert. If you'd like more herbal episodes to head your way, then one of the best ways to support this podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks, and I'm so glad that you're here as part of this herbal community. Also, a big round of thanks to the people all over the world who make this podcast happen week to week. Emily Thomas Anderson is the project manager who oversees the entire podcast operation, from guest outreach to writing show notes and on and on. I often tell people, I just show up. Emily does most of the heavy lifting. Nicole Paul is the operator for the entire Herbs with Rosalee school and community. She keeps an eagle eye view on everything to ensure it's running smoothly. Francesca is our fabulous video and audio editor. She not only makes listening more pleasant, she also adds beauty to the YouTube videos with plant images and video overlays. Tatiana Rusakova is the botanical illustrator who creates gorgeous plant and recipe illustrations for us. I love them, and I know you love them. Once the illustration is ready, Jenny creates the recipe cards as well as the thumbnail images for YouTube. Alex is our behind-the-scenes tech support and social media manager, and Karen and Emily are our student services coordinators and community support. If you've written in with a question, undoubtedly you got help from them. For those of you who like to read along, Jennifer is who creates the transcripts each week. Xavier, my handsome French husband, is the cameraman and website IT guy. It takes an herbal village to make it all happen, including you. Thank you so much for your support through your comments, reviews, and ratings. One of my favorite things about this podcast is hearing from you. I read every comment that comes in, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on lobelia. Okay, you've lasted to the very end of the show, which means you get a gold star and this herbal tidbit. Well, for this episode's herbal tidbit, I decided to go to the eclectic literature to pull out some quotes for you. The first one is from King's American Dispensatory from 1898. They write, "Lobelia is a most powerful and certain relaxant, producing general and permanent relaxation with freedom from spasms of all kinds." Next, we have a quote from Dr. Finley Ellingwood in 1919. He writes, "Lobelia relieves pain due to spasm of any character, but in its antispasmodic and relaxing influence, it is not narcotic in the same sense as opium. It exercises a soothing influence over nerve irritability, and a distinct anodyne result ensues. General relief from pain often follows when other measures have failed. The pain from renal or hepatic stone is more quickly relieved by it, and more permanently, often, than by morphine, because of the general relaxation." And the last quote comes from Dr. Harvey Wicks, Felter, 1922. "If lobelia be chewed, it causes an acrid, prickling, and persistently pungent sensation in the throat and fauces, accompanied by slight nausea and a feeling of warmth and distension along with the esophageal tract and in the stomach. The sensation is not very unlike that produced by tobacco. The salivary glands and those of the mouth are impressed, pouring out saliva and mucus in abundance." Hope you enjoyed these quotes from long ago. It's clear that when people taste and experience lobelia, it's a memorable experience. Let me know if you decide to try it.